In this video, we're going to take a look at Organic Studio's John Hancock Black. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink.
My at first thoughts were good, solid, no shading, no tone variation. Well, only true on fountain pen papers. As that isn't all that people use, it falls apart. It gives tone variation by pen and can give shading from gray to black on these non-fountain pen papers. I don't like shading in my black inks. I want solid black dark lines. And frequently on non-fountain pen paper, it looks like it's faded as a black, or even worse, gray when you thought you were getting black. Very unfortunate with this. Now, a lot of what I have bad about it is non-fountain pen paper, and on fountain pen paper it did give very solid black lines and perform extremely well, exactly the way you would like a black ink to perform.
I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Sailor My First pen with a medium fine nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Looking at the medium nib, we're getting a nice black tone with no feathering, no spreading, no shading, no problems. A very nice write the whole way through, easy to read, really separated out from the page. Looking at the broad nib, it is darker than it was with that medium. I wish that medium was a little wetter. The broad doesn't feather, doesn't spread, doesn't shade, looks really good, performs the way you would want it to perform. Really doing a great job, happy with it so far. Looking at the stub nib, we get the same tone that we got with the broad. It doesn't feather. It doesn't spread. Wait till you see the fifth line when you see it shades. Crap. On the anymore, two of the last three words on the fifth line, we start to see some shading. On the third line, the A of that you see is shaded as a gray. Now, I don't know if I was writing fast enough to maybe be causing some ink starvation, and that's what caused it, but that's what I see. Looking at the back of the page, you see that we get no bleeding, no ghosting. We have no problems.
To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done a Kaweco Sport with a medium nib. A Kaweco Sport with a broad nib. A Kaweco Sport with a 1.5 stub. The next writing sample is done on a WritePad's reporter pad. Looking at the medium nib, we get a lighter tone than we had on the Clairfontaine. A kind of gray, if you will. Now, it doesn't feather, it doesn't spread. It does shade a little bit. You'll see in selected at the TE, it's a little darker than the rest of the word. In store on the second line, it's a little darker at the E at the end of the word again. Looking at the broad nib, it is darker than it was with the medium. It is not as dark as it was on the Clairfontaine. It looks a bit faded as a tone. We're not getting any feathering. We're not getting any spread. We're going to see a bunch of shading coming in at the end of the second line, in the third line, in the fourth line, in the fifth line. Not looking good. Looking at the stub nib, we get a lighter tone than we had with the broad, a little darker than it was with the medium, certainly lighter than we had on the Clairfontaine. Not all black, a lot of gray to black. It's not feathering, it's not spreading, it is shading in a very unfortunate way because we see gray to black, and that is not good. Not in this case. We need this black to be black. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we get no bleeding, no ghosting. We have no problem writing anywhere back here. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done in a FieldNotes reporter's notebook. Looking at the medium nib, it is darker than we had on the Clairfontaine, just a tad bit, which is weird because I did remember thinking that the Clairfontaine was nice and dark, but this is even better. It's not feathering, it's not spreading, it's not shading, it is performing incredibly well and just the way we want a black ink to perform. I think it might be the slight tone variation of the paper that's helping it appear a little bit darker. Looking at the broad nib, it is darker than it was with the medium. It does feather. You see it all through mathematicians. You see it in now, after 2 millennia. Every word has some feathering in it. There's no spread. There's no shading. So for that part, it's doing pretty well. Actually, the feathering that's going on is very manageable and wouldn't really stop me from using it here. Looking at the stub nib, it is a little lighter than it was with the broad. It is lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. It is going to give just a tad bit of feather. No spread. No shading. It could just be how my eye is seeing it, but with it lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine and tricks of the eye, I have them side by side, and it looks a bit grayish to me. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we get no bleeding, very minor ghosting that won't stop you from using the back of the page. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. Looking at the medium nib, it is lighter than it was with the Clairfontaine, but it is just a smidgen lighter. It's not feathering, it's not spreading, it's not shading, it's looking more towards gray. That smidge lighter made it go on the Clairfontaine from black to gray. It's that magical line that was crossed right there. Looking at the broad nib, it is darker than it was on the medium with this paper, lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. It does feather. You'll see it on the second line, the word that. A lot of feather right there. It does have a very minor bit of spread, which this paper normally doesn't have an issue with. It does shade some. You see it in axiom on the third line, on some on the fourth line, based on the third line. Not doing well, my friend. Looking at the stub nib, it is a little bit lighter than it is with the broad on this paper. A lot lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. In fact, some might call this gray. Now, it does feather a little bit. You'll see it on the H and the AT of mathematics in the second line that was horribly written. Regardless, you see some feathering there. It's not really spreading. Again, it's not black, it's gray, and there are a couple tiny moments of shading. Looking at the back of the page, there is some minor ghosting, but it's not going to be a problem with using the back of the page, and nothing bled through and touched the page underneath. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Blackstone Barrister Black. Here is Diamine Jet Black. Here is Montegrappa Black. Here is Papier Plume Black. The next writing sample is done in an Office Depot reporter's notebook. Looking at the medium nib, it is darker than it was on the Clairfontaine, just a smidgen darker. It does feather. It does spread. It does not shade, so that's good. I mean, it's there. It actually isn't too bad, and what I'm seeing, I could probably live with it. Looking at the broad nib, it is certainly lighter than it was with the medium on this paper. It is a whole lot lighter than it is on the Clairfontaine. It does feather a lot. You see it on systems, drawing, on. Whew. Every word. Tons of feather. Does it spread? Yes, it does. Does it shade? Unfortunately. And it's unfortunately shading from gray to darker gray, not black. Looking at the stub nib, this dark gray tone is the same tone that we see a lot In the broad, it's a lot lighter a tone than we saw on the Clairfontaine, which was primarily black. Curious. It does feather. It does spread. It doesn't shade. It's not black. It's supposed to be black. It's a dark gray or a faded black. It's unfortunate. Looking at the page underneath, we see that these dots are only from the broad nib. The medium and the stub did not bleed through. But seeing the back of the page, you see there's a lot of ghosting and no writing back here. While it's nice to find other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a magenta ink by Birmingham Pen Company, their Gene Kelly Raspberry Rain. Here is a pink ink by Graf von Faber-Castell, their Electric Pink. Here is a yellow ink by J. Herbin, their Amber de Bermanie. Here is an orange ink by Mont Blanc, their Ink of Joy. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the medium nib, we get a nice dark gray tone, which is not black. It does feather, it does spread, it does not shade, it is not black. Did I mention it's not black? Hey, this is gray, not black. I realize these are non-fountain pen papers and it can perform a bit different, but a black ink should still be black. A blue ink going onto these papers shouldn't all of a sudden become red. Looking at the broad nib, we get about the same dark gray tone that we had with the medium. That's right, dark gray. I know this is a black ink. I have to remind you of that because this is not black, it's gray. It feathers, it spreads, it does not shade. It is gray, not black. Not black, gray. I'm disappointed in the gray, not black. Looking at the stub nib, we get the same dark gray tone that we had with the broad and the medium on this paper. It is way lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine because Clairfontaine had black ink on it. The same ink, but it was black there where it's gray here. It does feather, it does spread. Both of those are perfectly acceptable. We expect them to happen here. It doesn't shade, we don't expect it. You know what we do expect? A black ink to be black, and this black ink is gray. Looking at the page underneath, you see a lot of spots where it touched the page underneath, and I don't care because it's supposed to have been a black ink. Seeing the back of the page, it ghosts a lot, and you can't write back there, which is fine on this paper. I still don't care because this was supposed to be black, not gray. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? On good fountain pen paper, this is a dealer's choice. But for any of the other people out there, the 2 people on the planet that use other papers other than fountain pen friendly papers, go for a wet fine or wet medium, really wet. You need them to run the risk. Oh Lord, I can't even get it out. I've written with this. You need them to be very wet in order to not run the risk of shading from gray to black, or having a faded black look, or gray when you expect black. This color has thrown me off so much I can't even get through the nib and pen without major issues. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you want to support the channel, you can over on Patreon. Thanks for watching.